ahead and get started, just in recognition that we are running a little behind, and to try to make sure we have as full a conversation as possible today. So I'm Julius Lang from the Center for Court Innovation, and for anyone who might be unfamiliar with us, which is probably most of the people in this room, we're a nonprofit organization based in New York City that does three things. One is serve as the external research and development arm of the New York court system, and in that capacity we have about 20 demonstration projects helping them to experiment with solutions to problems that are particularly intractable. The second thing that we do is we have a research team of about 18 social scientists who are assessing the impact of different justice interventions. And the third part of our work is also national, along with the research, which is technical assistance, and I'm the director of training and technical assistance at the center. So it's so I want to thank Amy at the ABA and the California Administrative Office of the Courts for including us in the planning of this, really important conversation. Listening to the last session, I couldn't help be struck by the fact that when you think about it, we have no business being here today. Imagine a session, imagine a day devoted to ending the criminalization of diabetes, or how can, the role of courts and obesity. People would just look at you like you were nuts if you were spending a whole day discussing that, and yet we are because we need to. It isn't nuts to have this conversation for all of the reasons that we've heard in the two previous sessions, especially the one that immediately preceded this. And so, in planning this session, what we wanted to raise was the question, well, here we are, in the headquarters of the California court system. So many people, so many homeless people are coming through the justice system, unfortunately. And is there something that can be done, recognizing that unfortunate fact? Is there a role for courts to play? And we've already we've heard Judge Manley mentioned several times, and he is I'm happy to say one of many who are thinking, who are feeling that there is a role to play, and I think listening to Bevan Dufty's example of that prosecutor who was creating this obstacle just on the verge of something good happening is an example of just the opposite of playing a role that's creating more obstacles on top of the ones that are already there. And so what we want to do is kind of raise the question of whether there is a role for courts, especially at the front lines. When people are first coming into the justice system, is there a role for courts to play? Can judges make a difference? And later this afternoon, there's going to be a discussion about the homeless court model, which I assume most people in the room are familiar with. And so for the most part, we're not going to be talking about the homeless court model, which plays a really important role in resolving outstanding warrants and fines and other obstacles to housing and other services for this population. So we're asking a different question: is aside from homeless court, in addition to homeless court, are there other ways that court systems can try to be helpful? Can we be helpful in what is a really complicated problem, social problem? So to help us explore that question, we have three women, I'm proud to say, and the first is Judge Colleen Toy White, who runs the Community Intervention Court in Ventura, California, and everybody's full bios are in your materials. So I'll just tell you kind of what you need to know for the conversation, and you can learn more about our panelists after that. Next is Courtney Bryan, who's the project director of the Midtown Community Court in Midtown Manhattan. And finally, Allison West, who's the coordinator of the San Francisco Community Justice Center, right here a block and a half away from where we're sitting right now. So first I'd like to, just to give us context, ask each of our panelists to describe, tell us about the community that you're serving, and how the homeless condition presents itself. And I will say, in each of these examples, each of our panelists is sitting in a special court. And 2 out of 3 of them would be considered community courts, as we define that term, which are courts that focus on a specific geographic area and try to use the power of the justice system to solve community problems. So most people would be familiar with drug court, which is trying to use the power of the justice system to help address addiction. And this is, community courts are focusing on a geographic area and really have 2 clients, the individuals who are coming through the courts, some of whom are homeless and some aren't, as well as the community itself. Okay? So Judge White, why don't we start with you? Tell us about Ventura and the homeless problem as it presents itself in your jurisdiction.
Well, Ventura geographically is about halfway between Los Angeles and Santa Barbara. We have, I believe, a little more than 100,000 people in the city. And the way this problem presented itself to the court was, I had the former mayor and now councilman in Ventura call me. I had the chief of police call me. And they wanted a meeting to address the homeless issue in their city.
And just by how the problem presents itself, so is there, is there a high concentration of homeless people in a downtown area, or what's the problem itself we're trying to understand?
The problem that we had was in the downtown area.
Okay.
And that's how it presented itself. And let me just say, as an aside, we did this in a very team approach. And I think the best evidence of that is, I've got our chief of police in the audience, Ken Corney. I've got our mayor, Mike Tracy, and I've got 2 police officers that participate in our program. I've got our court executive here. This is a program that really developed because of the community. So the name came, we didn't get a name and then devise a program. We worked on our program and figured out the name should be the Community Intervention Program. Okay,
so your jurisdiction is about 100,000 people.
I think that's about right.
Okay.
110.
And the concentration of the homeless population would be in your central business district.
And then we have, on each side of Ventura, we have riverbeds, and they're dry riverbeds. And a lot of our homeless population will live in those places. We have a very mild climate. It seldom, if ever, freezes in our community. So it's mild if you have a house. It may not be quite so mild if you're living in the riverbed, but that's what we deal with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're picturing that, and that is an unusual configuration for many jurisdictions.
Especially when you hear from the big sisters to my left in the jurisdictions that they have.
So let's go to those big sisters. So Courtney, tell us about the area served by the Midtown Community Court and how homelessness as a problem expresses itself there.
Sure. Can everyone hear me in the back? Yeah, okay. So first, I'm really grateful to be here. This is an issue that I think has vexed every jurisdiction in the nation, but particularly I think vexed the Midtown Manhattan community. So our court is located in Midtown Manhattan and serves essentially the areas of Times Square, Hell's Kitchen, which now is called Clinton by some, Chelsea, and most recently the Upper West Side. And I think what's really notable, well, there are about 750,000 folks who live in this area, but the population swells to over 3 million when you take into the population coming in to work and for tourism. So it's the heart of New York City and a destination place, very transient in nature. What adds to that, and what is I think critical to kind of understanding our homelessness population, is that in the court's geographic catchment area, so our catchment area is 4 police precincts that are in those neighborhoods I described, and within those 4 police precincts are 4 major transportation hubs for the city and probably, frankly, the country. So we have Penn Station and Grand Central Station, the major train stations, and the Port Authority bus station, all in our catchment area. And that's notable in terms of how people move and facilitating movement in the city. But we see that those are locations where there are a number of homeless individuals who are essentially living in Penn Station and Port Authority in particular, and have been at varying levels over the years. The court's population, as far as homelessness, it's anywhere between 25 and 30% of defendants who are arrested on low-level offenses who come through our court, and I can talk about that a little later, identify themselves as homeless.
Okay, and that's currently homeless or homeless?
Currently, they would describe themselves as currently homeless, yes.
So a larger number would, if you looked at homeless in the last 2 years or something like that?
Correct.
Okay. So Allison, I think all of us, are familiar with San Francisco a little bit, and have kind of seen and heard about from our last panel about the problem. But do you want to talk about the area that your court project focuses on, and anything you want to add to our understanding of how the homeless problem expresses itself in the jurisdiction that you're serving?
Sure. First of all, as a Ventura County native, I welcome our Ventura County people. So, yes, so the Community Justice Center is housed in the Tenderloin District of San Francisco. It's sort of smack dab in the middle. You're in my district now, in the catchment area for the Community Justice Center. Our court, if you didn't visit it yesterday, is almost across the street. And we did a demographic study a couple of years ago, and about 80% of our clients are identified as either completely homeless or marginally housed, and those are split about 50-50. So we have a huge homeless population. We completely encompass one police district at the Tenderloin Station, and then we have portions of other police districts. All of those districts, but most particularly the Tenderloin, do citations directly to our court, which processes them more quickly through the criminal justice system. We never have been, nor will we be, a homeless court. Sometimes people get cited to our court for what I would call homeless crimes, lodging, obstructing, those kinds of things. Generally speaking, those just get dismissed. We have a very high failure to appear rate on those, but since they're discharged before and no charges are filed, then it ends up not being an issue. So
okay,
I think.
So just to get a sense of it sounds like given that you serve the Tenderloin in particular, and the other neighborhoods that you serve, you have a particularly high percentage. So Judge White has 100%. In her court, and we'll talk about the court responses in a second. Courtney talked about 30 as the base number, and so all of you are finding in the jurisdictions that you're serving, in the geographic areas that you're serving, a lot of your court clients are turning out to be either currently or recently homeless. So let me just ask you as a group, and anybody should just chime in, before we get to what you're doing about it, what your response to this problem, ways that you're responding, what do you see as the challenges? You have no control over what the laws are. You have no control over how they're enforced. You don't even have control over how they're prosecuted. You just have a job to do as a court. And many would say, well, we're the last people that could have any impact on these kinds of problems. We're just the referee. We just have to kind of call them as we see them. But there's nothing we can do. And so that's what we want to tease out. But recognizing that all three of you are trying to do the right thing under the circumstances. What are the challenges to doing the right thing? Why is it? Just to, and I'm sure everyone in this room could, start a list of those on their own. But just from your own perspective, what makes what makes doing the right thing with this population in a court setting just particularly challenging? Anybody?
I'm happy to jump in. I would say the word engagement, and it's in a couple of, I would describe that challenge in a couple of ways. One is that we're the criminal justice system and not a particularly welcoming place for people, especially if you've been arrested for something and you're before the judge. You may have been in handcuffs, held in a holding cell, you're charged with a crime, even if it's related to your homelessness. And so I think just that the system and people's experience of the criminal justice system, history of experience of the criminal justice system, fear, trauma, et cetera, is a barrier to any kind of positive engagement that we'll describe in trying to engage folks in services and linking them to housing.
So right off the bat, the environment that you're sitting in is itself such a negative experience before anybody gets near you guys. They're going through. They've been arrested. Now they're in the justice system. It's bad. So, Allison, what would you add to that as a challenge? Not what you're doing about it, but what are challenges about working with this population?
I think the biggest challenge I see is that a lot of our clients feel that the lives that they have are their highest aspirations, that they don't really see anything better for themselves, and we try to convince them that there is more and that we can assist in that. I don't want to call it hopelessness. It's just an acceptance of homelessness, of drug addiction, of being in the criminal justice system as more of a norm than something that is that can be escaped from. And that's something that I think our team faces every day and struggles with every day, is trying to convince our clients that their lives can be different, that they can be better, and that the court can help them with that.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing you say is, first of all, sort of a lack of hope, or
yeah, I don't think they think they're hopeless. I think they think this is my life and this is how it is. Yeah, I got arrested a month ago and now I'm in the criminal justice system, and I'll probably be arrested another month, and I was arrested a year ago, and this is my life. And it isn't, I don't think it necessarily translate into, oh, isn't it awful, I'll never get out of this. It's just, this is how my life is. This is my normal.
Low expectations that things can change. And then secondly, which I would think of as a different problem, that you're going to be part of the solution.
Right.
So I'm not expecting a solution in the first place, and if I were, you wouldn't be part of it.
Exactly.
So, okay. So, Judge, are there any challenges that you want to add to that?
By definition, anyone in our court is a chronic offender, and just the sound of that word tells you the population that you deal with. Our city has a diversion policy, so if you have only offended a few times, you never get to this court. Police officers take care of it. And so the ones that finally come to our court are very entrenched in substance abuse. They have serious mental illness. Most of them have ended up in the criminal justice system time after time after time. One of our earlier presenters talked about what happens to people in the system, and we had one woman who had been through the system 100 times. So that means she received a citation, she was put in jail, she came to court. It was adjudicated in court, and for most of these low-level offenses that we're talking about, it's credit for time served. So that means once you get in the courtroom, you're out. And where do you go? It's back out on the street. And then the police officers are trying to deal with you without arresting you or by arresting you, depending on how serious the situation is. And you know where they cycle back. And and you've all heard that definition of insanity. And I think that's one of the things that our community, we came to the conclusion we were doing that. And the definition of insanity is like doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result or something. We actually had to face that with people who had been arrested and cycled through the system 30, 40 times.
So your challenge, if I'm hearing you correctly, is in your case, you're dealing with a particularly high needs population who I'm imagining would be considered chronically homeless and perhaps severely mentally ill or just high levels of other kinds of problems along with homelessness. And so here the three of you are with these challenges. I don't know if anybody has thought of any others that we should throw in before we start to talk about what you're doing.
Can I say one, and I think this will resonate? We don't have enough places to put people. It's a very simple, a lack of housing options. That's what I would
Right.
say.
It's a given.
So, and I think the first panel made that very clear, that, just thinking about this kind of as a social problem, as a service, delivery problem, that it's not resourced well enough, and that there aren't enough resources, even if the justice system weren't involved, there aren't enough resources. And so I think that's going to be a theme, throughout the day. But let's go now, recognizing that, first of all, that this is an issue that is a reflection of an imperfect world, that the justice system is being asked to address this problem, that the people who are the people themselves are being cycled through the justice system in the first place, and that all the challenges you've talked about make the environment the probably least ideal place to engage, to make a difference, that people aren't expecting that anything's going to happen, and they're not expecting anything that's going to happen with you, and that many people have very severe problems when they're coming in. So Courtney, let's talk with you, because I think thinking about the levels of need and also the levels of seriousness in a justice context, since Judge White is dealing with people who come in with a lot of what we in the justice system would call priors, and Allison, as it turns out, has something like 75% felons. We might work our way up to that. And so tell us what the Midtown Community Court's trying to do in general, and then zoom in on this population.
Sure. So the Midtown Community Court is pretty exclusively focused on low-level crime in this particular geographic area, with the intention of reducing crime, obviously, but through alternatives to incarceration. So that is our goal: reducing the use of incarceration for low-level offending as a way of reducing crime. It's this balance of accountability for criminal offenses, and this is, again, overall our philosophy with every offender or defendant who comes through the court. But recognizing that for many people who are committing low-level offenses, there are complex social service needs, whether it's drug addiction, homelessness, mental illness, violence, and trauma. And so our approach is this combination of accountability and help by means of offering alternatives to traditional criminal justice sanctions like jail, fines, even walks, time served. It's trying to figure out how we can have a more meaningful sentence using social services and community service. And so,
And just to clarify, I know the sort of two-part menu, accountability through community service and social services is your overall philosophy. Does that mean that every single person is getting something from column A and column B, or is it
No.
more tailored?
It's more tailored. So, and that was a big theme, I think, of our community courts discussion was that one size doesn't fit all. And that's really the approach at Midtown. It's looking at each individual, trying to identify what are their underlying needs, what is the most constructive response, and crafting an individualized kind of sentence or way to dispose of their case in a meaningful way. And it's some combination of community service or social services, or it's maybe exclusively social services. And particularly with our homeless population, we social service, it's very much a social service kind of heavy response in terms of how we handle them.
And what might that look like? I mean, first of all, we need to. So you're talking about misdemeanors, not
Right.
felonies, misdemeanors, and so you're operating in this legal framework where whatever you're doing needs to be proportionate to the
Right.
legal situation, first and foremost. And so, what are you able to do in that envelope? What are, I mean, the way I look at it is that that projects like yours should be trying to first of all not grow the envelope, but use the envelope that the jurisdiction is proportionate in the jurisdiction and fill it smarter. That's really how I kind of look at it. You're trying to fill your envelope in a smarter way. So what does that look like?
Right, and actually that I'm glad you raised that. The proportionality is critical. Our philosophy is not to further penalize folks in the name of trying to rehabilitate. It's really about ensuring that there's due process throughout our process, and proportionality is important. So we have really an extensive menu of social services. Anywhere we offer about 20 different programs. They come and go sometimes depending on what the need is. When we see new needs, when we have new partnerships, when we get smarter and realize we need to be doing something different, we create a new program. And actually our Veterans Initiative, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is an example of that. Most people are getting, because it's a low-level offense, what is a proportionate sentence or a way for them to fulfill their obligation so that their case can be dismissed is between 1 and 3 days, or 1 or 3 sessions of something. So it's really generally very low level of engagement with folks who are getting some kind of mandate. We do, depending on somebody's criminal history, we do have longer term options. So for drug treatment, for example, people who have a substance use issue and that's kind of their primary presenting issue, we have a range. We call it graduated sanctions. So we have someone, if it's their first, second, maybe third arrest, it's our 3-day treatment readiness program. If it's a somebody who's facing more jail time, essentially, they've gotten unfortunately racked up more or they have more priors, then our 6-day treatment readiness program too would be an option. If it's somebody who has again, it's kind of a lot more contact, then they may be looking at long-term drug treatment, similar to what happens in other problem-solving courts, where we're putting people who want to accept treatment as an alternative to incarceration in anywhere from 90 days up to a year of either inpatient, outpatient treatment that is case managed by our court and monitored by the judge. So it's a real range. And we're doing that through our on-site clinic. So that's a feature of our court, is that we have on-site social workers, partner agencies that are there to assist us, both providing services that are correspondent to a court mandate, as well as providing voluntary services for anybody, whether they come in the door, unfortunately, as a defendant, or whether they walk in off the street as somebody who is in need of help. I'll end there.
So, I know that immediacy is one of the key strategies that Midtown is using. So somebody sees the judge and goes right upstairs and starts to participate in whatever the mandate is. You've been open now for 20 years. You just celebrated your 20th anniversary, and homelessness has always been an issue. There's been a concentration of homelessness in the area that Midtown serves. And so over the years, what are some examples of ways that Midtown has worked with the provider community and with the city to help address this problem?
Mm-hmm.
You know, recognizing that, you know, situations change and at any given time, a different kind of partnership might be appropriate.
Mm-hmm. So I'll talk about four really quickly. One is the first that kind of comes to mind for us was called Street Outreach Services. And this was a joint outreach program with the NYPD. So the police department, outreach workers from the court, partnered in engaging street homeless individuals in our catchment area with the goal of engaging them in services. So that was one strategy, and while the partnership didn't really continue between NYPD and the court, what happened is we were able to see the evolution of that model, and now the approach is really institutionalized in the way that NYPD and the homeless services community in New York City works. So it's now very common for Common Ground or the Bowery Residence Committee, which are major homeless services providers in the city, to conduct joint outreach with police officers on the street, in the subways, and so that really is kind of a spin-off, I think, of the street outreach services. We also partnered, at some point we had a program called Court to Home with Common Ground, again, a homeless services agency that was trying to link defendants who were coming through the Midtown Community Court with supportive housing, shelter, and then hopefully supportive housing. Another program, most recently we called Project Reconnect, and that project came when the Department of Homeless Services, a city agency, was very active in New York City in kind of coordinating the efforts of service providers, homeless services providers in the city. They were particularly interested in figuring out intercept points like hospitals, the criminal justice system, to engage chronic street homeless folks, especially those who were in the subways. And so they co-located the Bowery Residence Committee on site at Midtown, and in addition to trying to link individuals to supportive housing through, sometimes as part of a way that they would dispose of their case, sometimes on a voluntary basis, we also worked with them to conduct bench warrant clearance initiatives for Department of Homeless Services clients, so individuals who were in shelters or in supportive housing programs, so that they could remove that barrier to achieving whatever their goals were.
And in this group, that would be an adaptation of the homeless court model.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I'll say is this is the Veterans Initiative. So we, and I credit my colleague in Newark, Jethro Antoine, with this idea, which was a simple one. We've got to have a lot of veterans coming through our court, and we hadn't really thought about how we could be identifying veterans who were, may have been accused or committed low-level offenses who were coming through our system. And so what we did is partner with the VA to be trained in just generally in veterans issues, to do better screening, figure out how to ask the question and ask questions in a way so that veterans are going to identify themselves, because all of you know probably better than I that they aren't necessarily raising their hand and saying that they're a veteran. They may not even recognize that they may be qualified for benefits. So we and then we created a special short-term group where the Veterans Administration comes on site and works with veterans to figure out what is the status, what is their status, what may they be entitled to right now. It's been one of the most fulfilling things that we've done, is because there are immediate benefits that people who had no idea that they were eligible for find out through this program. And the VA has been a tremendous partner in helping link our clients to advocacy organizations, legal services organizations, to help make those adjustments to discharge status, all in the effort of trying to get them services. So that's the most recent initiative.
So one of the things that I think that's particularly encouraging about the last thing that you mentioned is, in this group, we have been talking about veterans courts, and we're going to be talking about veterans courts. And I don't know, honestly, whether you would be counted as a veterans court, but what that feels like as a positive development is that other courts are listening and hearing about these opportunities that are being afforded through official veterans courts, veterans court models. And the VA is turning out to be a very receptive partner to when outreach is made. And so that I think it's turning out that there are a lot of possibilities to tap into those resources, especially when local courts can demonstrate that there's a particularly high number of vets coming through their calendars. And so that's something I think for us all to take away. So Judge White, let's go to Ventura. So you've described, a kind of a chronic population that you're trying to deal with. And the first thing I'd like to just ask you is the homeless court model has existed in Ventura for, I think, a decade.
More.
Okay.
More.
So you guys have been clearing people's warrants at the back end for more than a decade, which is fantastic. And what I love about your story is that you're demonstrating that both of these approaches, are important. That clearing warrants when they surface, when someone is on the verge of getting housed, or the warrants are serving as an obstacle to benefits, an obstacle to anything, getting them cleared is really important. But that 10 plus years into doing that, you recognized at the front end, maybe we could be doing something else, because, as you said, we felt insane that we were doing the same thing at the front end over and over again, and people were cycling through. So what are you trying to do differently?
Well, our homeless court focuses on discharging fines and fees, because that's an issue, as many of you know, to the homeless. And then, as an aside, they get referrals to social service agencies. In the community intervention court, our focus is on developing an intensive, well-supervised case management program for the individual. And that's done by the team that meets weekly before our court convenes. And the focus is to get the person involved in the court connected with the treatment. We have the treatment providers there. Typically, these are low-level offenses, as I mentioned before, but it's not uncommon for the person to be in custody. And so this is a voluntary program, and one of our biggest, when we talked about challenges, one of our biggest challenges is to convince someone they should stay in a drug treatment or a mental health treatment program for 6 months or longer, when if they just entered a plea, they could walk out the door with credit for time served. So your incentive has to be something besides fines, fees, and jail.
So what is your incentive? That sounds like a tough sell.
Sometimes it is, and sometimes we fail. But the incentive is, this is a rare opportunity to get housing, to get treatment, to change your life. You've been on the street for 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is, and that's too long. And, that sounds a little Pollyanna, but we have a public defender that will try to convince, she'll cajole, she'll muscle them a little bit if she has to, in the kindest of ways. And I'm amazed how many people sign up for this. I mean, they just say, this is the time. And those of you who have dealt with people involved in drugs, you've heard these sick and tired of being sick and tired. I think some of our people come to us that way. And they've been through that cycle of being jailed and come to the courtroom and do 3 days in jail, and they're ready. And if we catch them at the opportune time and get them involved in the court, then if something happens, we can still keep them. I mean, for example, if they have a dirty test, it doesn't mean that you're automatically excluded. And the other thing, because we have a courtroom with police officers in it, and it's not an adversary role.
So what do you mean by that, Judge? Do you mean that they provide courtroom security, or are they playing some other role, the officers?
Well, I've got a couple of them here today, and
So you have to tell us the truth.
I'll tell you the truth. They're not security. I have somebody else for security. They're there because they know these people. They know how many times they've arrested. Let me ask one of the officers, what's the highest number of times you two have arrested people?
57 person in a year's time.
Right. And they're in the courtroom, and they're encouraging. They know Sam, and they know Joe, and they know Sally. And when they come to the courtroom as part of the team that's working on the solution, that is a powerful statement to the individuals that are in court. This is not just the guy that wants to, manhandle me, put me in cuffs, and throw me in jail. This is the person that they may have been involved in the arrest, but now they're here in a role to support and do what they can as a part of this community intervention.
And before we go to Allison, since you raised this role of the police kind of recognizing that we're talking about chronically homeless, and we've never talked about this, but are there opportunities for the police officers who know that specific people are working in your program? Are there opportunities for them out on the street to be supportive, to act perhaps differently, I don't know, than they might otherwise, recognizing that they're participating in your program? And that could be a question for you or them, I don't know.
Okay. Well, we've got the chief here. Chief, you want to?
That's absolutely why we do it. We're here for the docs, so that we extend the treatment and outreach beyond the courtroom. So when they run into the person who they have courtroom meetings with, and they know they've met with the social services providers and the public defenders talking with, they're part of that engagement, then we extend that out. So, hey, Joe, remember last 2 weeks ago in court when we said we were going to do this? Have you done it yet? Have you made your appointment? How's it going? And things like that. So there's providing hope and encouraging that incentive for people to find a different path in their lives.
And if Joe is drinking a bottle of wine or doing something that is technically, illegal at that moment, what is there any, what happens? I mean, and I'm sure that there isn't like a single answer to that question, but it's just kind of, because often that's, it's very, a police officer in New York once commented to me as in talking about the joint outreach, that if you want to find somebody doing something illegal in this population, it's not that hard.
Generally, our discretion, whether we can work something out there, maybe contact one of the social service partners that we have, and see if they can come out, work something out in that particular moment. If they get to the point where they need to go to jail, we'll go back to jail.
Or at least go back into the system. And so, Judge?
Well, I was just going to say, as many of you know who work with this population, sometimes they're at terrible risk of being hurt, if they're in the middle of the street and they're drunk, or they're in an area where they may in fact be victims. Sometimes that becomes a part of getting them in the system. If they spend a couple of days in custody, then they've dried out, they've sobered up. And I literally have had people in my courtroom where they did not know where they were. They were so under the influence that, they didn't know if they were in a courtroom or not.
Right.
And based on their language, I think they thought they were not. But anyway, that happens, and we deal with that. But, one of our problems, too, was the business community, and again, it's been described by other speakers, people were living in doorways and, sleeping on the sidewalk and urinating and defecating. And I'll tell you, as a judge, you and I've been a judge a long time. I don't have to tell you that. You probably can see, but I made hundreds, if not thousands, of orders. You will do that. You will not do that. This is the first time in my career I ever made, and it was an order/commitment with one of the people in our courts. And I said, Mr. Smith, you understand I'm about to order you not to urinate or defecate in public. Do you understand that? He said, yes, ma'am. Are you going to agree to that? Yes, ma'am. Now you're going to be, and he was being taken from the courtroom to a treatment, to a live-in treatment center. And so, there's something about when you make those kind of orders, or you make an order that you're going to get substance abuse treatment, you get the person right now, and you get them right into the treatment. And
So-
I think that's one reason we've been as successful as we have been.
So I think that's a really significant observation in this whole discussion, that having the, members of this population come through the justice system, thousands of orders not to do things and to do things without any corresponding way to provide for an alternative, feels a little back to your definition of insanity. And so I can imagine that from a judicial perspective would be very frustrating. So Allison, let's go to you. So what kinds of cases are your clients coming in on, and what are you doing with them?
Okay, the majority now are felonies, nonviolent felonies. I would say the vast majority are drug or drug-related offenses. Possession,
And
possession
I'm sorry,
for sale. Yes.
so you said earlier we're not and we never will be a homeless court, and I think in this context,
Right.
homeless court is a model that is a good thing, and I don't think you were trying to say
no, I'm just
comment on that model.
No, it was not any kind of denigration of homeless courts. It's just that isn't what we are. We really are a criminal collaborative court where because I don't really feel that homelessness should be criminalized. So and we
So
don't,
you meant that we're not a court that's set up to
punish people for being
criminalize-
homeless.
to
Right.
focus the criminal.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So we primarily take people with, we take misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. And so we end up with the majority of our clients having drug and or mental health issues. And so we see a lot of auto burglaries, we saw a lot of shoplifting, we saw a lot of possession, those types of things. And because we have sort of a larger legal hammer than Midtown, we're able to mandate more treatment because, we have clients who are facing prison terms. And so it's a little easier for them to opt into our program, for at least for some of our clients, for long-term residential treatment or long-term outpatient treatment, intensive outpatient treatment, that type of thing. And I think, and because we have such a high population of homeless people, we do refer our clients to agencies that assist with homelessness. We try to get them shelter beds. We connect them with agencies for long-term housing. But one of the problems we face, because they have harsher sentences, they have longer rap sheets, that we're really looking to stabilize them and get them out of the criminal justice system so that they can cease to be homeless, so that they can be in stable housing and not get evicted the next week because they're still using or because they get rearrested. And so I like to think of us as a stabilization court rather than a homelessness court, because we're not really prosecuting crimes that are affiliated with homelessness, a set lie law. We don't really take those cases. And so what we're dealing with clients who are facing really long-term and more serious legal substance abuse and mental health issues, and we try to treat those issues so that they can be ready to go into housing. And we have now, if anybody's interested in how to start a veterans court, the way we started it was by separating out the veterans that were in our community court and having a separate calendar for them. And now, a year later, we're looking to split that off.
And
But
do you know if you're counted as a veterans court in the counts of the number of veterans courts in America?
I don't know if we're counted or
Okay.
not,
All right. So
honestly.
good.
We will in 2014 because we're going to be separate. But again, even with the VA ready to house somebody, sometimes they won't house them right away because they really need to deal with their drug problem and their criminal problem first. Then they're ready to be stably housed.
Of course. So we have 5 minutes for questions, and let's go right here to David.
Observation and a question. It seems as though, and involved in the justice system, our courts are becoming more social service providers than ever before. As courts, we're being asked to write grants, we're being asked to connect and collaborate, so on and so forth. And I think it's a good thing on the one hand. However, and I don't know if that was Steve Manley or Len Edwards that said, if our systems in place in our communities dealt appropriately with things such as mental illness and veterans issues, we would never have to deal with it in court. And so my question is this, is since we're doing that and we're dealing with community courts and that's already in place, what efforts are being made to get the billion-dollar companies, the Googles, the other big companies, Yahoo, IBM, all of these organizations that in New York, you're talking about millions of people coming through there to get involved themselves so that we're not scraping. And our justice system in California is one of the most underfunded in the world. We make up 1% of the entire budget of the state. We're laying off hundreds. We're closing courts. Our hours are down to minimal hours. And so there are a lot of judges and community partners that are saying, you know what, we can't be providing these social services. And so there's a lot of pushback. And so what efforts are being made, if any, that you're aware of, to get some of these $1 billion, I think it's just obscene, there are $1 million campaigns going on in fundraising. What efforts, if any, are being made to address that?
So I think that's a great question, and I'm not sure that this panel, which is talking about court-based responses to this problem, people might have read an article in the paper about what the city of New York might be doing with Google to help fund services, but I think it would just.
Okay, let me just make a quick response. I can't answer your question, but I can tell you how we answered the question. We had a problem, and as a community, when we got the stakeholders together, and you all know who those are, social service agencies, district attorney, public defender, the mayor and the chief of police, and all the Salvation Army and the Project to Understand It. We said, we've got a problem. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to have a court that deals with it. And you're right. The courts have had tremendous budget cuts. We all recognize that. I dare say the chief of police and the city have also. But we all said we're in for this. And yes, it's going to cost us some money. Yes, it costs the city staff to do this. But we also balance that against what we know the cost to the system is. This doesn't answer your question, but we know it costs $500 to house someone who's going through the system for one night. They all most of our clientele have serious medical problems. Someone's already addressed that. But we also know the human cost. Let me tell you, in the first 4 weeks we were trying to get this program off the ground, we had 4 people die. 2 that were in the program and 2 that we anticipated would be in the program. Now, once you deal with that fact, and I take the bench and Tom Smith is not there. Well, where is he? He died. What IBM does and what Google does, and I would hope they'd call and give us $1 million because we need it. What they do, they do. What communities do is what communities do.
So I think we're going to have to end the conversation here just because of timing. But my takeaway from what we've heard from our panelists is that this is the panel before us. This is a messy, complicated problem that's under-resourced, and there's so many things. There's so many things wrong with this picture, and when it comes into the courts, it doesn't get any easier. It's full of challenges, but it's gratifying to me to hear that the three panelists are examples, and other judges that we're going to be hearing from are trying to do what they can to try to address in some way this complicated problem. So, shall we have one more question from the room? Anybody have something they want to?
Everybody wants lunch.
Great.